Super special episode today, and before we get into it, we have something special to unveil as well. New room in the house for you to come experience as a client. Beautiful whiskeys, of course, to drink, which we always share, but really the updated luxury music system for you to come and enjoy when you're building your own and get a taste of what some of the best stuff out there sounds like. We're going to talk a lot about cables, a lot about power today, but there's a lot of action here to do at the house. If you do get a chance to visit the house by appointment only, make sure you schedule with your technologist or myself to get a great music system demo or a theater demo, or of course one of our many options of automation throughout the entire home. Thank you. Welcome to another episode of the Artisan Series with Architecna. Today, and I've said this before, but today really is a special day. With us, we have a special human being that I never thought would be sitting in this room, but today is. We'll get to that in a second. We're going to cover a ton of things today, but primarily, you spent a lot of money on your audio gear. You spent a lot of money on your acoustic treatments. You worked with your designer and your sales guy over the last several years, upgrading your system, but it still sounds horrible and it sucks. So we're going to cover why that is today. And of course, we're going to do some fun things with Pinball. It's the only thing we could think of that had some type of mechanical engineering aspect to it for our guest today. Another thing that's special about today's episode is there's actually going to be two versions. So if you're like me and you only have a few minutes to scan through and hear some of the sound bites or the pinball machines that we're playing, whatever it is that you want to be, great, that's the theatrical release. But we're also, for those of you that really want to understand how this stuff works, because it's extremely complex, and if you really want to understand the value of what they provide at AudioQuest, there is going to be a director's cut. It'll be double the length, but I promise by the time you're done with that version, you will know exponentially more about how power works and how their cabling works and why it does what it does to your system. And with me today is none other than Garth Powell from AudioQuest. I would say I've called him Wizards of Wires and things like that online, but he is, I would say, one of the most appreciated known engineers in the audio industry that's out there and about, that's protecting our equipment, making it sound the best that it possibly can. And he backs it with other information besides snake oil, which of course you'll hear that term all over the place and probably in our comments as this episode goes on. But I assure you, by the time this episode is done, you will not be in that camp any other. Without further ado, Garth, tell us a little bit about your background, why you're here with us today, and thanks for being with the Artisans at Architecna.
Well, thank you so very much for having me. So background, I've been with AudioQuest now for just about 12 years. Prior to that, I was with a company called Firm & Sound for 16 years. And, essentially in the audio video business, particularly high performance or high-end audio, since I was 17 years old. Went to my first high-end salon at age 15, rode my bicycle, took all my savings from 3 part-time jobs to get a small integrated amp to go with some Jensen loudspeakers I already had. And, for whatever reason, I think it was midsummer, it was a little slow that day. And I was this precocious, like I'm a young kid, I'm far too many questions and so forth. And they thought I was amusing and took pity on me and brought me back to their back room and, explained that you can't just sit anywhere. You need to sit right in the middle here. And they dimmed the lights and so forth. And it's the late 1970s, so they put the needle down on the record. And they ruined me for the rest of my life. My jaw hit the ground. I was already, studying with a classical percussionist to become a professional musician, but I also had a great interest in the technical side of the reproduction as well. Hope that maybe somehow one day I could do both. I do, but at the time I didn't know how you did that or how I would get there. I was just infinitely curious about all of this and passionate about it. And for the first time, I'm hearing imaging. The sound isn't coming from the two speakers. It's coming from in between and beyond them and way behind them. every musician is exactly where I would normally associate them being when I listen to them live and perform with them live. And they're not moving, and it's this perfectly stable panorama. And the dynamics, the microdynamics, just all these things that at the time I would have even had the audiophile terminology for. But it just didn't matter. It was real. It was impactful. I was completely swept up in this and just enjoyed the next 5 to 10 minutes so much. And after that, I just came back to earth and realized, what does this cost? And they gave me a number, and I thought, okay, I've got 3 part-time jobs and an allowance. I should be able to afford this by age 35. So that wasn't going to work. So basically, what I did was I figured out, how can I become an employee there? I became their technician by the next year.
What was the first integrated that you got? Was that the piece that got you into this? Was that integrated?
Yeah, it was a Kenwood.
It was a Kenwood.
And actually, I didn't have it long because, not too long afterwards, my grandfather passed, and I was willed his Macintosh system.
Oh, there it is.
So then I had a 270 and a C22.
Awesome.
But his speakers were voice of the theaters that were built in the wall, so I still had to have the lowly Jensens, which eventually got upgraded by things that I made. These days, a lot of people will ask, oh, what do you run at home? And I do run, things that you could go out and buy, where, for example, a turntable and a tone arm and a cartridge is concerned, because I'm not a mechanical engineer and I don't have a factory in my apartment. But well, what are you running for amplifiers? What are you running for preamplifiers? What are you running for speakers and everything like that? And I'm just like a bunch of ugly gray boxes. And the reason for that is that if you're a serious analog engineer, part of the way you learn, and part of how I was trained by broadcast engineers from the time I started apprenticing with them at age 15, is constantly coming up with new ideas, new circuits, and building prototypes. And most of those prototypes will never see the light of day. Most of them will never be produced. Some of these ideas will find their ways to others. I've ghost engineered many things throughout the decades for other companies that I didn't, regularly work for. But the thing is that the way I was trained, from the studio microphone to the loudspeaker and everything in between, is one system. And even though in your career, if you go out and you do this, you might specialize in amplifiers. You might specialize in DACs. You might specialize in a tone arm. You might specialize in a loudspeaker. In my case, power, and then later cables. But it's not enough to really, really know your way around that technology. You need to equally understand what they're associated with and connected to, because everything is ultimately interfacing and affecting everything else. My cable designs could not be as good as they are if not for 40 plus years of learning everything I could about circuit design and constantly failing, but learning from those failures.
And I'm glad you said that, because there is something to be said about that in the world of whether you take on whiskey or watches or audio or whatever, cars. You really can't understand it at the levels that you need to, especially at some of the price points that we're talking about, unless you kind of go on the journey. You can't just listen to somebody that says, oh, you should buy this, and you put it together, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's not impressive. That's because you haven't learned what's best for you. Everybody has a different set of ears. Everybody's got a different room style that they have to overcome. And so it's just, everybody has a different journey, and you can get as much as you can from your designer or your sales guy or gal. But ultimately, you're going to have to experiment yourself a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Would you think that's a fair statement?
Absolutely, it is. And it's a situation, too, where there's a place, like you say, for everything. And I don't want to get in the way of somebody else's journey. I don't want to determine for them that, I hear this a lot, particularly in, like higher end or like the luxury side of audio. This kind of idea is very much akin to the expert when it comes to the fine arts, or perhaps a wine connoisseur, and so forth. And it'll be a kind of like a similar situation of we have a we have a particular attitude, and we have a particular language and so forth. And the idea is this like, well, it's very good that you have that opinion, but you need to understand that as the, possibly most important, member of my local audio society. And, then I do also have my own blog and, upwards of 5,000 listeners. It's very important for you to understand that I've been gifted with very special golden ears, and I can hear the things that you can't, that you might one day, but until that day comes, you need to listen to me. And you see, when we listen to, say, songs, 22nd, there's a palpable realism that you'll hear, with this change that I just made to your system, where, basically the sound that's emanating from the bridge of that cellist, is coming out in a way that it just didn't work before I got involved. And that's the thing that you really need to be, concentrating on. You might not be there yet, but stick with me. You'll get there eventually. Yeah, that drives me crazy. All I want to do is get out of the way. It's not, when I'm not wearing my engineering cap, I'm a professional musician. But because of being in that position and being, a person who's so ensconced in music and so involved in it and realizing how personal it is, I play a type of acoustic jazz that, well, essentially I've been studying most of my life. And coming home from music school in my college years, my mother, for example, who I love very, very much, she's still with us, she's 91 now. She told me, this is many, many decades ago, Garth, I love you. Please don't make me listen to that. So the thing is that if that's going to be true, who am I to tell anybody else how to voice their system or what it needs to sound like? What it needs to be is I want to give you the most of what is there, the most out of your system that you invested so dearly in. That's what it's about. No coloration, no personality, good or bad, just less distortion, more content. How do I do that? That's what I'm trying to accomplish.
Well, Garth, I have to say that I don't know if there's going to be a lot of trying there. I feel like, and this isn't a shameless plug, by the way, I have been on the record saying in multiple scenarios, multiple times with different vendors and also different people that we work with, that your cable line that you came out with is hands down the best cables I've ever heard. And that's not because you're sitting here. I've said this when you're not around. I've said this to other manufacturers, and of course they scoff at me and get upset and things like that. But this is one of the reasons why Architecna leads with AudioQuest when we're doing luxury systems or high-end audio systems, and we don't sell another wire. If we're doing pre-wiring of a home and things like that, of course we do ice cable, which they make a fantastic wire as well for what they're trying to accomplish. So I think what we need to do, though, is make sure that the audience understands why the cables that we have and what you've designed and AudioQuest has manufactured are what they are. And so, and aside from that, of course, the different power pieces that you've engineered and dare I say invented. So the segments today, and we'll cover some of these things. Common hidden noise problems in the home. This is something you've been talking about since Furman, and this is something that's going to be an easy story for you to cover, but they're all over the place, and I don't think even till this day, people really understand how bad noise is, and especially with all the new Wi-Fi technology, cell phone towers, and the robust, and they keep growing, and how bad those things are for their equipment, and how high-end quality cables make a difference. Why do all the new mythological creatures and down? Why do they change the sound of a system, or do they change it, or they just make it better, or they just eliminate some of the stuff that other cables put in? Obviously, we're going to discuss power conditioning and transient peak things. Of course, we have a Niagara 5000 behind us. Ground noise, why that matters. And then at the very end of it too, the components protect your audio gear from surges, spikes, dips, things like that, or brown. So we'll cover that as well. And in all of this, we'll be doing what I think would be fun for you. You tell me if we're halfway through it, you want to do something else, you just want to start drinking whiskey instead. My thought was, hey, you've been playing in the world of engineering your whole life. You'd probably get a kick out of playing some what I think are technological marvels, or what they call worlds under glass, which is pinball. Are you a pinball player at all, or is this something you've never done?
When I was younger.
Awesome.
Yeah, there was a local, there wasn't an arcade when I was young, but there was a thrifty drugstore, and in the middle of the Visalia, 105 degree Fahrenheit summers, You'd walk and get your nickel scoop of ice cream and then spend your, quarters, from my allowance and from my other part-time jobs and so forth. Seeing if you could rack up, your score and get enough replays. I haven't done it much since then. It's been too many years since then. I don't think any of the ones that they had were, any of the celebrity ones, like you've got the Elton John and so forth, like that.
This is amazing. You'll like this.
These weren't that fancy. It was a local, a drugstore instead of, a real arcade. That was a little beyond what we had.
Okay. Well, we'll get 3 to 5 machines in, and you give me your score. I'll give you mine. We've got a few up here, and then
mine's going to be pathetic.
Well, no. You're going to give a rating on how fun the machine is.
Okay.
We're not going to compare in pinball. We don't want to do that. It'd be like me and you comparing and me understanding how you design your cables.
Yes,
we don't want to do that either.
Very good. I'm not the pinball king.
You're not a pinball wizard.
No, exactly.
So with that being said, we've got a couple of them up here, and we've got some down in the other room as well. So you have a lot of options to choose from. I think you'll have a good time. All right, let's get to the first topic, Garth.
All right.
Uncovering hidden noise problems. I'm not going to rifle off a bunch of questions here for you. You're pretty familiar with this topic, but how does noise from power affect the sound of audio gear? Let's start with that.
So the thing is that it doesn't matter if it's from power or if it's from induced radio frequency noise that's in our atmosphere and is ever present, always there. Doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're in the gated community or the ghetto. It doesn't matter if you're in the city. It doesn't matter if you're rural. People want to imagine all kinds of things. Oh yeah, Garth, I know I have bad power because I have, essentially seen my lights blink occasionally when the amplifiers turn on. No, that's inrush. That's going to be fixed in basically 2 seconds of the things being turned on. I suspect I have bad power because I live at the end of the power line. I suspect I have bad power because I'm in a big, metropolitan city. The fact of the matter is that worldwide, nobody has power that's good enough for the level of sophistication that we're subjecting them to with a great audio or video system. It's just, and to be fair, it's not the utility's fault. It was never meant for this. Those were meant for electric lights. Those were meant for simple appliances with an AC motor. They were not meant for what we're trying to do with them now. But it would be a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure change to try to make power that's up to the level of what we're trying to do with it. So it's on us, the component manufacturers with their power supplies and their upgradable power supplies, and power conditioning, cables, isolation, everything we can do to lower noise matters because it's ever present and it's always there. This becomes the issue. And by the way, we have to kind of quantify what that noise is too, because a lot of people will kind of imagine, well, by noise, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a hiss that's in the background? Shh, or are we talking about hum, at 60 cycles? Well, we don't want excess amounts. We don't want any of the 60 cycle, and we don't want excess hiss. Now, there's some electronics that are always going to have a little bit of that in the background. That's called self noise. That's inherent in the circuit itself. But the best manufacturers keep that extraordinarily low. When we're talking about this type of noise, I'm talking about an insidious type of noise that's omnipresent, always there, but here's the trick. Here's the rub. You're never aware it's there until you experience it vastly reduced or taken away. And why do you care about minimizing it, lowering it, or taking it away? You care about that because it is modulating, modulating is just a fancy engineering term for mixing with and corrupting your primary low-level signal. And when it does this, it creates what's called a masking effect. And you end up with this. And I don't want this. I want this. So how do we get there? That's the idea.
I hear what you're saying, Garth. Well, my question is, because based out of several manufacturers, not only that we carry, but that are out there, we have these giant monoblocks or 2-channel amplifiers, and we do not ever want our stuff plugged into a line conditioner or a power center or a power plant or whatever it may be. We got to go direct into wall. Mm-hmm. And so what do you say to those people?
That they're right.
Okay, tell me more.
Because they're professionals. They care deeply about what they worked so damn hard to create, and they listen carefully, and they've already had through the decades a lot of really bad experiences plugging their power amplifiers into various power regenerators, power conditioners, power distributors, whatever you want to call it, various technologies, multiple brands, and they found them wanting into their power amplifiers. Now,
I want to tell you.
it seems like,
I'm sorry, I'm not to cut you out there. I want to tell you, I've got two pretty high power amplifiers plugged into one Niagara 5000.
I know.
Am I doing this wrong?
No, you're not.
Okay.
Here's the thing. They're right in terms of what they know and what they've experienced. The thing is that not everybody that deals with power deals with it in the same way. I, essentially got started, with power, well over 25 years ago in a professional sense, not just making power supplies and very basic filters for other designs that I've been doing for years and years and years before that. And coming out of technical school, I would have kind of thought, and what I was always taught was that if you do your job and you build a really good power supply for whatever component it is, whether it's an amplifier, a DAC, whether it's a preamplifier, phono preamplifier, equalizer, that should be good enough. And you can hook it up to a scope, and with some very simple tests, it will show you that your noise and your rejection is very good, and I'm done. Just not a problem. The problem is that those simple tests don't show everything that's really there. They never did, and less so today. But I didn't understand all of this. And the thing is that their amplifier is still subject to noise. It's still having certain problems. But the thing about a power amplifier, unlike every other component, is it needs to be able to deliver a great deal of transient current to the loudspeaker in order to control it and give you all that dynamic impact and everything that you need for every transient. And the problem is going to be, they're up against physics. If you do something in a power, like a supply box, whatever the technology is, that's between the current delivery system of your utility power to its own power supply, that raises what's called impedance, you're going to impede the flow of that instantaneous current, and you're going to do something that they are scared to death of, current compression. So we have to guard against that. And most of these traditional designs, no matter what the topology or technology, they've all had this issue. I realized this years ago when I tried, like at Furman, some of the very, very best power conditioners and power regenerators that we had to offer, and on my system found them failing. I experienced the same thing these amplifier manufacturers did. All of a sudden, the dynamics went away. All of a sudden, my bass was anemic. Oh, what's going on? This isn't right. And when I started really, looking at what the complex problems were, I realized where we had failed. But that failure is an opportunity. So from there, I developed, a transient power correction. At that time, I was calling it transient power factor. This is based on a technology that's been around since the 1920s. This is not airy-fairy. This is not snake oil. This is just basic physics. It's how to deal with lowering the transient impedance going to the power supply of said amplifier so that we give it a current reservoir up to about 25 milliseconds when that audio transient hits and it needs it. Now, the steady state, what's called root mean squared RMS power on a decent receiver is going to be fine. If we could promise to only play sine tones, if we would only listen to pipe organ music, we're good to go. But the thing is that that's not really what's going to happen. So every time that there's a transient from any instrument or, like explosion or anything impactful in any kind of theater presentation, no. We could, be pulling from our wall 20 amps peak, 40 amps peak, 60 amps peak. And we've got to make sure that we're not only not impeding that, but if we could we actually have another power supply at the ready to help it do that more efficiently, more effectively? And actually, I'm here. There's another thing that I can tell you too. You don't need that Niagara with its transient power correction for these Luxman amplifiers. You really don't. What you could do instead will work every bit as well. You simply tell your electrician, I need an 80 amp service. And after they yell at you about, do you understand what it's going to be like to try to pull 4-aught, like a wire through your walls, and this really will not fit into the outlet either. After you get through that problem, the second promise that you need to get them to agree to is, can you take my sound room and move it within, let's say, 200 yards of the local substation? If you can do those two things, you don't need what I have to offer.
I have some similarities to what you're even requesting, because we charge Teslas here.
Yeah.
And so there are 60 amp and 80 amp poles, and even the conduit and the wire that had to be done there right next to each other.
Yeah.
And it was a headache to even get those there within the garage, let alone all the way up into the music room here.
This is into a conventional outlet. Then into the Niagara 5000. So what that translates into is that none of us have ever heard coming out of our audio systems, coming through. That's just the detector and the way it voices that. But basically what you're talking about is likely 1,000 times differential, and the difference, and what that's going to translate to is all of that valuable harmonic structure, everything that's, the imaging, all the extreme highs, everything that makes audio sound real, you have coming just from conventional power, this masking effect that's happening when that modulates your signal. Here, we can reduce that greatly. Sometimes we can't get rid of it entirely, but we can reduce it enough to where you're going to get the performance that you paid for.
How else does the Niagara series and some of the PowerQuest stuff benefit a client's hi-fi system?
Lowering the induced noise. That would really be the main thing, because the thing is that power amplifiers are unique. They're the only thing in an audio system with variable current. Everything else is a fixed, stable current. So they don't worry about, like an impedance or how much current, like flow is being restricted. There's no such thing as current compression going to a preamplifier or a DAC. But when it comes to induced noise, they matter greatly. And also, an amplifier is the highest level, which means that it is, even though it's essentially going to be affected by induced noise, it's going to be affected by induced noise the least, because the volume has cascaded up the highest in the system. The lower the, the signal level, the more it's going to matter. The beginning of the digital journey, the beginning of, say, a turntable or the phono journey in particular is extraordinarily low. And in a situation like that, you can have a, very, very wide dynamic range that you're trying to reproduce. The best electronics are capable of this, but at the very, very, very bottom of that volume shift or dynamic range, you need to make sure that there's no noise there, and there always will be some. That's that masking effect I talked about earlier that we want to get rid of or reduce as much as possible. Now, when we talk about low level, what the hell's Garth talking about? The reason you care about that is that if we were to compare a factory bottom of the line car stereo with the system that we have behind us, or any other premium system, and we were just listening to a pop recording that was optimized for Bluetooth earbuds, something I might really enjoy, like Amy Winehouse, Back to Black or something like that, but it's been slam limited with 3 dB of dynamic range. The difference between those two systems is it's audible, but it's minimal. But with most recordings, particularly ones with full dynamic range, full bandwidth, well, what's going to happen there is the imaging, the three-dimensionality, the realness of everything, my ability to tell, oh, that's a Hamburg Steinway. No, that's a Yamaha piano. That's a Suzuki or Roth student violin. No, that's a Winari. That's a Stradivarius. That's an Amati. Our ability to tell that, When we can hear those things, it's because we have been all capable. We don't need to be professional musicians. We don't have to be audiophiles. Everybody has the hearing to be able to tell, that sounds different to me. That impacts me in a certain way that I am not so impacted by that other. How are we hearing that? It's very quiet, very low signal levels where those rich harmonics are coming through. We almost tune out the loud stuff as noise. We, like of a different type. We concentrate and focus on the details, and those details are low in level. That's what defines the best of audio and video production. And those components were made to do it. Man, they're capable. But if induced noise gets in and modulates that so valuable system that makes everything so real and palpable, we get this. And again, we can't have that. We can't.
And sometimes too, you're making a great example so people understand your point. But there's a lot of times too on systems that aren't, I would say, managed appropriately. It's not as dramatic as that, but something just doesn't sound right. It doesn't seem real. You know what I mean? So there are components that I've heard really high-end systems that it's very two-dimensional. It's flat. The instruments don't have that sound around them that create that reality. It's definitely not convincing my brain that there's a live musician or a live ensemble in front of me. Whereas the best systems out there, coupled with your equipment, do.
Right. But you're describing the exact same thing in just a different way that deals with your experience.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. And why? It's because the things I describe and the things that you describe both exist. If a loud bass, sustained bass, is at 0, like dBu, 0.775 volts. I know that's technical, but don't worry about it. Anything can reproduce. My boombox can do it. My earbuds can do it. Something that is 40 decibels below, 80 decibels low, 100 decibels way down at the floor. The best systems deal with this stuff closer to the floor perfectly. That's the sound and the experience you're defining, that I'm defining, that others would define in a different way. But what it comes down to is, do you want it to be real, or do you want it to be clearly phony and fake? If you want it to be real, if you want to get it all, you've got to make sure that what's down here is clean. But that's the challenge, because with every year that goes by and the more consumer items we have that are all radio-based, Bluetooth, cellular towers, satellite, it gets to be harder and harder and harder. We didn't have to deal with this as engineers when I was a child and I was studying with and apprenticing with broadcast engineers. Today, it's everywhere. There's no place to run and hide. So we have to deal with this.
It's true. It's true. Well, I appreciate that, Garth. And before we get into our next segment, let's go get our pinball machine on. Let's go get our pinball wizard on, if you will. So the first pinball that's going to be up is going to be Guns N' Roses. Second one's going to be Elton John. Third is going to be Weird Al Yankovic. Let's go. The 10 scale. Now this is the first one that you've played in a long time. Yeah. 10 being, this is the most magnificent thing I played since whatever. My drum set last night, or 1 is like, not a fan of Guns N' Roses. Whatever. What do you give it?
I'm going to give it a 8.
That's pretty high. I thought that. I'm going to give Guns N' Roses, knowing what's in front of us currently today, I'm going to go 7.2. My favorite part of the interview is going to be this, because I'm very passionate about your guys' cable line. So high quality cables, do they make a difference? And do all cables work the same in the worlds of premium? And do they just improve the sound? Or what is your take on why your cables are special?
This is very much akin to many of the things that I design, whether they're power or whether they're analog circuits, and cables I just see as an extension of that same philosophy, even though the application has to be different because you're dealing with, like a unique technology or topology, like the way all these different parts are assembled. It's about doing no harm. That's, like a part of the Hippocratic Oath, but it's also, like something that AudioQuest has been, like I'm saying and pursuing as, like what our primary goal is for every, thing that we make, and particularly the cables. And it's worth noting because our belief with cable is the best cable is no cable. Now, when I say that, for the love of God, I don't mean wireless. Wireless is a travesty. Avoid at all costs if you want high quality. If you need convenience, we all use it. I do too. But for the, highest level of quality, that's never going to be ready for prime time. There's too many problems with it. There's too many limitations. You're just going through more stuff that is inherently going to weaken the symbol and reduce your resolution. However, when it comes to cable, if it could be 1 inch, if it could be 2 inches or something like that, instead of a meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, 10 meters, it would be an advantage. Now, is that going to be practical? Absolutely not. So if we're inherently up against it, what do? We just, everything in the design, you start with a premise of, I'm not enhancing the system, I'm not creating the sound and the voicing that, once again, as I stated earlier, I alone have the golden ears and this distinction and the sensitivity to create. You don't have that yet, but I'm going to impart some of that on you. Aren't you lucky? No, that's not what we're going to do. Our whole thing is get out of the way. I'm going to have faith in and trust in not only the component manufacturers, but in somebody such as yourself that assembled this system and put everything together and aligned everything and made sure that everything was as good as it possibly could be. So part of that has to be get out of the way, let it perform as well as it possibly can. Now, are there numerous technological challenges in order to create that? Of course there are. Some of them are the same things I've talked about with power conditioning, because a lot of it is simply down to induced noise. But there are other factors as well. And a digital cable is going to have slightly different issues than an audio interconnect cable, which is going to be somewhat different than a speaker cable. And those are going to be considerably different than a power cable. And yet, where induced noise is concerned, it's the same problem for all of them. But the way we address it will be different because we have different electronic or electrical challenges with each of those applications. So it's also never taking a single marketing idea or success that you've had and just machine gunning it everywhere throughout a line. I see this so often, and it makes the pitch easy, but it's a horrible idea. You have to treat everything as a unique problem and put the right technology in the right place, the right tool for the right application.
All right, so what should we look for in a cable to get better audio quality? And quite frankly, I mean, how does AudioQuest design their cables differently than everyone else?
There's a way in which a lot of the premium cables that exist, I mean, not something that you'd get from Amazon for a very, very low price, but if you're talking about a premium cable, actually the thing is I would basically congratulate and salute most of our competitors because, at this far into the 21st century, they're all aware that induced noise is a problem. Okay. So they're all dealing with that. They're all aware that the quality of the conductors, that's the engine of your cable, is going to make a great deal of, impact. That is going to have a lot to do with the overall low-level distortion, in your, in the cable that's going to impart that to the rest of the system. So that's something that we're all looking at, and different types of topology to make sure that the bandwidth that is delivered is as low in distortion as possible. Everybody has a different way of going about this. I wouldn't want this any other way. But I think that they're all very, very sincere in their approach and the fact that they're using usually good sound science and that they're listening, reasonably well. But yet, to your broader point, what's different about us? I think maybe less to do with, well, we have perfect surface copper plus. We have perfect surface silver. Like they have they have Ono, or they have like a different type of like a high purity copper with 6 nines of purity. Like we have this type of dielectric, they have this type of dielectric, and so forth. And we can just get lost in the weeds with this. But what's it ultimately mean to the end result? And the thing with everything that I design, whether it's like an amplifier circuit, whether it's a crossover circuit, whether it's a cable, or whether it's power, it's an engineering term called linearity. And that's just a fancy term for even as possible, as consistent as possible. Why is consistent necessary? Because you can very easily take a very, very good idea in science, and in the science of audio and video reproduction, and in your circuit, in your design, find that when I try this idea with this technology, I can measure, or I can detect and hear, wow, this one area really got better. Wow, listen to the sterling highs that I'm getting. Listen to what we've done to the bass. This is really incredible. Listen to the liquid mid-range that we've managed to create. Well, those are all wonderful things. I like bass, I like mids, and I like highs. And what I really like is when they're all used together and they're all correct, and I didn't impart my personality on them. Anything that you do has to work at every volume level, on every system, on every component, to the greatest extent you possibly can. Again, it comes down to putting no personality on everything, getting out of the way, and what do I have to do to impart the greatest resolution back. I can even measure this. We have something called differential tests, where I can, like basically measure what we do against an earlier design that we've done or a competitor's design. And we can, we can make arguments, and everybody will, about we're down this many tenths or this many decibels at this frequency in our filtering of said noise. And we have a bandwidth that goes to here, and their bandwidth goes to here, and so forth. But what does that mean to what you actually hear and listen to? With a differential test, the thing that's interesting about those, without getting into the details of how it's performed, is that the net result is how much information do you want to lose? And when it comes down to that, our designs are extraordinary.
What is the jump from the previous generation to what you introduced when you came on board with AudioQuest? What is this cable doing differently than my previous set of K2s?
So the whole thing was looking at a number of things to do with our noise dissipation systems and things. So there were a number of refinements there, but maybe one of the single largest differences in the interconnects, audio interconnects, the speaker cables, and the power cables was dealing with what's called characteristic impedance. We have a technology we call zero tech. It doesn't mean zero resistance. It doesn't mean zero loss. There's no such thing. We live on planet Earth. That's not possible. But if you talk about a cable that like maybe goes to an old-fashioned roof aerial or something like that, and people that looked at that or remember that, also a lot of digital cables too, they'll have stamped right on there 75 ohms, 50 ohms, or something like that. Now, does that mean if I take my little handheld ohm meter and hook it up to the positive negative, it's going to read 75 or 50 ohms? No. What they mean by that is that this was developed by AT&T and a number of different engineers and different companies around the world in the United States, going back to way before either of us were born. This would be the 19-teens and 20s. Okay. And in order to do very, very, very long, multiple mile, multi-kilometer, or across the ocean transmissions and have them even be audible, they found that one of the things they would have to do was have a matched impedance of the circuit that was feeding the signal and the part that was receiving the signal, or the load. Okay. And once that what was called impedance electrically was effectively even, then the cable had to have what's called a characteristic impedance that honored those impedance, and thus would create the least loss, the least distortion. The thing about having a cable that's going to inherently have, every cable is going to have some sort of characteristic impedance, whether it's labeled or not. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with the fact that most of our audio-video components are going to go from a very, very mismatched impedance. It's very, very low to very high. In fact, there's a lot of technological reasons why that's an advantage for them. The problem is that that cable now has nothing to do with what the component that's that's sending the signal and the one that's receiving the signal ultimately do or want to see. So it's interfering. That's why that's an issue. And it's doing so in a nonlinear, again, that fancy word, inconsistent way in terms of the way it deals with induced noise, in trying to dissipate that said noise, and the way it's trying to essentially carry that signal with the lowest distortion, with the least loss possible. That's where we care. So if I can get rid of that problem, I've created something that's much closer to our ideal. What's our ideal? No cable. What's our ideal? Do no harm, least possible. And something that has a zero-tech design is effectively, where characteristic impedance is concerned, essentially equivalent to using about a 1-inch cable.
That's awesome. And yeah, and there's been a couple scenarios where we had to be careful with the type of cable we were selecting, because I believe it was a phono stage, and we were going over a very long run, and so we had to do a different type of cable because your cable there was no resistance or impedance or whatever the terminology was behind it that would have created
it's incredibly high bandwidth, and so we have other designs that are appropriate, different tools in our arsenal, and there's a different tool in a case like that because phono is incredibly low level and so forth, and so sometimes you have to have a technology that can actually limit a little bit of the performance in order for it to be stable over a very, very long run.
And that's what, that's what it was. Now, what is the advancement or the advantage for doing the zero and then the zero base separated, similar to what you see back here?
Well, the zero base is still a zero-tech cable, but it has one extra technology added to it that's not possible to do everywhere, but it's called RFND, or radio frequency noise dissipation. And what that is a phase canceling, similar to the way phase canceling headphones work, that people like to use, like in loud environments or on an airplane and so forth. But the idea is that instead of a microchip or instead of something, or some kind of a circuit or a growth at the end of your cable that's trying to deal with, reducing the noise, and not that that's a bad thing. I mean, it's like reducing the noise is reducing the noise.
Very complimentary.
But but here again, everything has unique problems, and so how do you best serve and deal with that problem? When you're talking about very high radio frequencies, the sine wave is incredibly small. Up at the frequencies of Bluetooth and cellular tower, you're talking about a sine wave that is so small I can't get my fingers together that teeny. So all of a sudden it becomes a situation where every square millimeter of your cable is being induced by noise. Having a filter or a chip at one little section of a cable is fine, but what about everything leading up to it or after it? No, you want to do it across the entire surface if you can, because that will be more consistent, more linear. RFND does that. It's a phase canceling array across the entire return or negative section of the cable. And why wouldn't that be in every cable that we make? I wish we could.
Just about to ask it.
I wish we could. Unfortunately, it works so effectively that that filtering starts to affect some of the very, very, very subtle, very low level frequencies above 10 kilohertz. Oh. So I can only use it for a base cable or something like a ground wire, or the ground wire, like ground wires inside our AC cords where there is no audio signal going through it.
Got it.
To be adversely affected. So again, the right tool in the right place. As I said earlier, it's not a one-size-fits-all, like a machine gun approach of, hey, we got a great idea, let's plaster it everywhere. That's a
perfect, your scalpel.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's a perfect example of, if you're not laser precise about where you put your tools, when you need, essentially a Phillips driver, don't grab a hammer.
This is true. This is true. All right, I don't want to put you on the spot because I don't even know how you're going to answer this, but what's your hot take? We do this with all of our guests.
Hot take. At audiophile shows and in dealers, stop playing the same 10 audiophile tracks. We're in the music business. Play music. Expose your customers and yourselves to everything. I go to a lot of audio shows, but I'm also, again, when I'm not wearing my engineering cap, I'm a professional musician. I can't tell you how much I appreciate, like dealer rooms in particular, when they're spinning interesting music all day and it's clear that they're music lovers first, audiophiles second. The idea that we have, an incredibly sophisticated, incredibly expensive system, and there's only 5 to 10 recordings we can ever play over and over and over again, even if it's music that I really enjoyed once before I heard it for the 10,000th time. I was just telling another dealer the other day, for example, I'm a jazz musician, so the genesis of jazz is blues. I'm a student of the blues. I love the blues. But, so, for example, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Tin Pan Alley, great recording, great performance, great music. It saddens me that the people that want to play this over and over again, if I ask them, who's Buddy Guy? They can't tell me. Who's J.B. Hutto? They can't tell me. Who's Lightning Hopkins? They can't tell me. I'd like that problem to go away in our industry.
It's time to go to pinball machine number 2. This is their latest music pin, and they work directly with Sir Elton on the design of this. And so this is ranked right now this is ranked like number 30 or 40th in the world on all pinball machines. This is like in top 10 right now. So we'll see how it plays. You got a lot of fun in this. It's a faster shooter. It's an easier shooter than this. And it's very straightforward with what you want to do.
Okay.
1 through 10.
Okay. See, one of my pinballs got stuck on this one, so I'm gonna have to give it a 7.
So I think this is one of the best shooting pinball machines on the planet Earth. I'm gonna give it a 9.5. Whether you're watching the theatrical release or the director's cut, if you're liking this content, please like, subscribe, share, do all the bells and whistles and all the different content things, whatever these guys are telling me. They'll all pop up on the screen. Whatever you guys do. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Roll of power conditioning. We've touched on some of these topics already, but I want to make sure we hit it home. So what is dirty power? Bluetooth, cell phone towers, things like that. And then in the world of our cabling or your cabling and power conditioners with the Niagaras and down, how can they eliminate those things that people are dealing with every day and they don't even know the type of chaos there is being havocked and created on their systems?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it's just a matter that the noise is going to be ever present. You can't entirely eliminate it, but you need to eliminate as much as you possibly can. You need to do it as consistently and evenly as you can.
Okay.
Doesn't matter if it's a cable, doesn't matter if it's a power, and for that matter, even things that we don't make. This is true for all the rest of the component manufacturers as well. And if you talk to most of them, everybody's aware of this in various sundry degrees. So within your particular area, this is what you need to do in order to maximize performance in this day and age.
Okay. What about, question. This is a question hot take. Are cable lifters necessary? Go.
Necessary? No. And they're not necessary in the same way that that fine-tuning or voicing a system is not necessary. You would still get some level of performance.
But you can hear it.
But you can hear it, is the thing. So it becomes a question of, as long as you don't, mind the aesthetics, because I'll be the first to admit, most cable lifters and everything like that, it's one more thing for everybody to kind of aesthetically object to, what are those? Like, why are those there? Like, how can that possibly make a difference? Well, they do. And essentially, in the case of our cables, they lower some of the induced noise going into it. It's just one more layer of something that we can do in order to maximize performance. Are you still going to get, like superb performance without them? Yes. Will it be a little better with the lifters? Yes, it will.
Okay, awesome. Moving on to number 4, why ground noise matters. What is ground noise, and how can it cause fuzzy or unclear sound?
Well, the thing is that there's 3 different types of noise that can occur, like certainly on an AC line, and then of course ground noise also exists all the way through an audio system. So, but basically for power, you would have your line, you'd have your neutral, and then you'd have ground. But the ground was originally created around the world for people's AC lines, essentially as redundancy safety, to help prevent electrocution and help reduce instances of fire.
Okay.
But also it has another great advantage, and this is something that everybody in the broadcast industry has known long before there was any kind of rule that you needed to have that redundancy ground. Well, they were already doing it because it is your drain for induced noise, because you will never eliminate all the noise. So what you can't eliminate, you drain back to earth. And this is why earth is maybe, and therefore grounding, proper grounding, is possibly the single most important thing you'll ever do in a system. Like induced noise without a system, it's very much like plumbing. And so what you don't want is, like the main, like a pipe, coming away from your building or your home to be stuffed up. Like if it was a sewage pipe, everything's backed up. You've got a mess on your hands. You've got to make sure that everything flows properly. So you have a situation with with earth ground where an awful lot of systems will do a superb job of trying to deal with the main power or filtering line and neutral, or with the rest of the components, everything else where primary signal is concerned. But ground is kind of considered, 6 of one, half does the other. And I understand this because in electronics and in technical school, we were always just kind of ground, just put everything onto the chassis. This is bus area of the PC board. Everything, make sure the impedance is relatively low. That's good enough. But just some sort of wire to go back there and it'll all work. Complete BS. It does not work like that. It's the thing that everyone gets wrong. It's the thing that everyone overlooks because they just weren't told otherwise and they haven't studied it enough. But it is possibly one of the single most important things. I like to tell everybody, what's the most important cable in an entire system? Is it the speaker cable? Is it the interconnect cable? Is it your digital cable if you're running streaming, and or like CDs and DVDs and so forth? Which cable is it? It is the single power cable that's feeding a Niagara. Why? Because that's your primary return to Earth.
Well, that's what our good friend Patrick sold me on as well, and that's why we've got a nice Firebird sitting over here.
Exactly.
That thing wasn't cheap. It cost as much as Andrew's car.
Yeah. But even if you didn't spend that much money, given wherever your budget is, you want to make sure that I would rather everybody had AudioQuest power cables, for example, all the way throughout the systems, and AudioQuest for all of your interconnects and all of your digital, because all of them are made to not only dissipate noise but drain noise that's left over, but ultimately working its way back to Earth. And there's various and sundry means that allow us to do this, but it's a situation where that's your biggest pipe. That's the one that's going to be able to effectively get rid of the most of it. And if I had a nickel for every time a customer has called me up and said, I've been to your seminars, I bought this Niagara, I bought this PowerQuest, everything, sounded so great at the dealers. Everything was so amazing with that shared listing evaluation, A/B comparison you did at your show, but I'm not hearing the difference I expected at home. I'm not really, I can hear a difference, but I'm not really convinced that this is doing as much as I really had hoped for. Am I hooking something else up wrong? And when I used to get these calls many, many years ago, I would waste an hour going through every part of the system and wondering about setup problems and issues, and then until I found out a commonality, and now I go right to it. It didn't come with a power cable. What power cable you're in? Oh, I already had one, so I used that and saved some money. Yeah, no, you need one of ours because it's an integral part of it. Oh, but it's just 2 meters. I mean, how much difference could that make? It's the delivery system back to Earth. Our patented ground noise dissipation doesn't even work without our cord.
And so with that being said, and I'm glad you brought that up because we've had that conversation many times with some of our clients. With that being said, and I guess the most important component is at what level does that start to work on the AudioQuest lineup for power cables?
Everything.
All of them.
All of them.
Okay. And the reason why I ask this is because we're big believers of building things in balance. Mm-hmm. If your system costs you $20,000 its entirety, we're not going to ask you to go buy a Dragon power cable.
Right.
I know you don't want to hear that maybe, but...
Every man, woman, and child needs a Dragon.
I should have a Dragon system here. I know what I'm doing.
Sell your kids for medical experiments. You need a Dragon.
And for those of you who don't know, what is a pair of 8-foot pair of Dragon speaker wire? What's the cost currently?
I have no idea. I'm an engineer. I get to be, blissfully ignorant of all this. Patrick can tell you.
Around 10,000.
Get out of here. Pair of Dragon speaker wire?
Oh, speaker wire?
A lot more than that.
Yeah. You're thinking the power cord.
I think it's going to be closer to about 30 or 40.
30, yeah.
30 to 40,000 bucks for a pair of speaker wire.
Yeah.
Now the good news is people have bought them, and you guys have sold many of them.
Yeah.
But those are on systems that are 200,000, typically up to $1 million. Mm-hmm. The system behind us right now is probably about $250,000, and there are no Dragons on it. It's even out of my budget. I got to buy whiskey. But understand that what we're talking about in particular here is the ground noise. For it to work, once you get your Niagara, you have to get the one from the Niagara to the wall. And I agree with you. And I had a conversation with a former employee of AudioQuest that said the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And then also the next for me, I've got a couple of other. We got an Energy 1000 back there. What about previous generations?
Yeah,
they all do too.
But those still work very, very well in that regard.
Awesome.
Part of it comes down to something we call directionality. Not just in terms of people have seen arrows on some of their cables, but usually with most manufacturers, that has to do with the way their grounds have been connected. And it's still very important that they do it that way, and it's still very real. I mean, like on an RCA cable, one direction will be better than the others. But in terms of where every single conductor, whether it's a shield, whether it's a power, supply cable, or whether it's a signal conductor, every single strand has been tested from the reel for optimum directionality as a drain, not as a conductor of the primary signal. That's something that's, to the best of my knowledge, only we do. And not only that, but it's difficult to do consistently or right. And I know this because for pretty much the last 7 to 8 years of my 12-year tenure, it's done exclusively by me.
If your wires that you're using on your audio system do not cost at least as much as your car, you're doing it wrong.
Cables costing more than your car. Well, the thing is that it depends. Everybody values something differently. But in my particular instance, I drive, like a Kia Soul GT, and I need room for all of my drums and percussion for my other portion of my blended career. But the thing that I can tell you is I enjoy music and music reproduction way more than my Kia. Sorry, Kia.
Pinball number 3, here we go. Weird Al Yankovic on one of the most high-tech pinball machines today. Surprisingly, Garth is his fan favorite is Guns N' Roses right now. We'll see what Weird Al does for him. What are your thoughts?
Okay, well, see, this one doesn't have, like a little sprung ball plunger. So I'm going to give it a 6 just because I'm a traditionalist.
Because I know what the machine is capable of. This isn't fair. This game, I'd probably go with you on a 6, but I'm going to give this one an 8.5. Okay, so this last segment, we had a lot of stuff we were discussing, surge protection, a couple of other components, but we're going to go through and kind of just make sure you get the right tips. So when you're doing some shopping, you're discussing your audio system with your dealer or with us, which you should be, you're asking the right questions, you're equipped with the right knowledge. We're going to touch on surge protection and a couple of other things that are near and dear to your heart to make sure that people can make their personalized choices with their audio system, which I think is an intimate choice. They can make it effectively and they can do it correctly.
Okay. I would say that surge suppression in our power conditioning line is the bonus. Performance always has to come first. And one of the things that I applaud most of our competitors for is the fact that within their technologies and their technological and financial constraints, they have definitely paid attention to that and done their level best. You know, our products are different and so forth. I believe that we can, in fact, I can prove we, can yield more resolution from a system given our technologies for a given price point pretty consistently. But but they do the job. One of the things that I noticed though is that if you're out just buying a $20 or $30 AC power bar or strip, the whole pitch is protection, surge protection, surge protection.
But up to $1 billion.
Exactly. But ironically, that you'll never get. But but it looks good on the package. But at any rate, but ironically, particularly in the high performance world, the more money you spend, the less that becomes the pitch. And in a way, I think that's right because performance needs to be the first story. That needs to be the lead. However, surge protection still matters actually, for not the fact that everybody lives in a lightning prone area or that everybody is going to watch their investment in tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of audio video gear go up in smoke. That's realistically, statistically not going to happen. But here's what people don't get about all of this. And that is the fact that most of these surge suppressors are sacrificial, and they also, here's the other part that they'll never talk about, is that they actually adversely affect the audio performance. This is and add noise of their own. This is why a lot of premium ones have very little protection, and a lot of them have none. Because they've listened to every component, they've listened to every circuit, and they've realized, oh, that sounds nasty, I'm getting rid of that. But our idea is no, I want works every time, set it and forget it, 100% no fail surge protection, and I want to make sure that it has no effect on my audio and video quality. That's hard to pull off, but I've spent my whole career doing it, and you have to have a lot of experience there to know what the pitfalls are so you can get rid of those. That's the first part. The second thing is that, look, I'm going to be honest. If I've got a component that's full of vacuum tubes, if I've got a big robust power amplifier full of transistors, the idea that micro surges coming in every day, not lightning, but the stuff that's just always going to be there and get through the power supply, is that going to matter to those circuits? No, they're going to laugh in the face of that. But if I've got, surface mount integrated surface chips, like I'm going to have in a word clock, like I'm going to have in a DAC, like I'm going to have in a CD player, a DVD player, and a projector, in a television, oh, no. We got a problem now. It's not the big catastrophic surge that's going to blow the thing up that's your problem. Your problem is incrementalism. Take two projectors or take two televisions, sequential serial numbers, as similar as possible. Keep one of them in the box, put the other one up in service. And the one you put up in service, plug it directly into the wall. You have my permission for this test. Okay? And it's still going to look pretty damn spectacular. And you're going to run that thing for 3 years. And then after that third year, it's time to take that other mate out of the box, put them side by side. They're not even close. Because every day, those integrated circuits that basically don't want to see 3 volts of, of a surge, not 100 volts, not 1,000 volts, not 10,000 volts, 3 volts across the wrong junction of some of these chips, you're starting to micro fissure and distort them. They're getting a little worse every day as they get pounded 100 times a day. Not by something that would make things go up in flames, but just the things that are there to begin
It's more
with.
wear than it should be. What is the product that you would recommend to the people that need a nice tightly mounted TV, or of course to not have something ugly looking with their projector mount?
We have actually something coming out next year, but in the meantime, just like running like a power cord from anything from our PowerQuest like series.
What's the smallest one?
Through. The PowerQuest, currently there'll be something much smaller that's about the size of a VH tape that's coming next year. But until that one's ready, a PQ2 or a PQ303. Actually, here's the thing. From the PQ2 all the way up to the Niagara 7000, it's non-sacrificial surge. Set it and forget it. As you move up in price, the only thing that changes is not the quality of the protection, but the quality of the audio. The more money I have to spend on that circuit, the more I can make it sonically non-invasive.
That's excellent information. And of course, so as soon as that releases next year, we'll make sure Andrew gets one for his TV that he just bought from us. But
it's going to be called the PowerQuest TV3.
Oh, awesome. There it is. You heard it here first. Quick recap of everything that we covered today. Of course, the common hidden noise issues that we all experience day to day, especially with high quality and high fidelity instruments. Do high quality cables make a difference? I think we solved that and talked about that today. Obviously, power conditioning. Ground noise is a big topic today, Garth, which we covered, and why that matters. And of course, protecting the audio gear and a couple of other little tidbits in there as well, which some of the stuff that you just showered on me, I didn't know as well. AudioQuest. You've already given away something that's coming next year. Is there anything else that you want to cover or say before we part ways for this particular segment?
The only thing that I would really say is that anything in an audio video system is important. Absolutely everything it needs to be paid scrupulous attention to. Anything that you would upgrade throughout time or throughout the years or something like that is a worthwhile process. You're just in the pursuit of re-engaging yourself, like with your system, with your movies, with your cinema, with your videos, or with your music. However, the thing that I would caution one about is that if you're really going to build a great system, it's foundational. So your room is foundational, your electricity is foundational. A lot of the the stands and so forth, and but the structures that the components are going to sit on are somewhat foundational, and certainly power is foundational. Now, whether it's talking about power conditioning or regeneration, or whether you're talking about cables, it's considered to be an accessory. But the thing is that it's really not. It's more of a foundational product. Because the thing is that if you were to look at throughout the years to upgrade, because technology is always changing. If you want to get better speakers, good. I applaud you. It's great. Better amplifier, better DAC. Whatever it is you want to upgrade to, you'll hear all of that. But the thing is that when you do that, if the foundation isn't right, if the power in particular isn't right, you'll be getting more of the signal that's left over. Because once you lose signal, you'll never retrieve it again. Your power, basically electrically, your system starts at the power. Once you lose that low-level information to the noise masking and distortion, you'll never get it back. All you'll do is get more out of whatever signal is left over.
I think that's well said, Garth, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. For everybody else at home, again, 2 versions. If you watch the short one, if you watch the theatrical release, don't forget, if you got some time on your hands, having this playing in the background will not hurt your brain, I promise. Subscribe, comment, like, share, bell, whistle. What is there? There's other things, whatever you do. Make sure you follow us on Instagram as well. Subscribers are growing. Thank you so much for our loyal base, and we'll see you next time.